Hi, I'm Richard Hall, and this is Impact Exchange. Well, business these days is, of course, inevitably global business. With the rise of globalisation, we've seen increasing challenges for contemporary organisations and contemporary business. Accompanying that, of course, was the consequence of many multinational corporations establishing joint ventures or wholly owned subsidiaries in host countries. And those host countries were very often emerging economies and certainly cultures that were very different from those in the parent country. Well, one of the most important scholars in the field of international business, and indeed a consultant in that particular area, is our guest today on Impact Exchange. Professor Paula Caligiuri is the Distinguished Professor of International Business and Strategy at the Damore McKim School of Business at Northeastern University in beautiful Boston. Paula, welcome to Australia, welcome to Monash Business School, and welcome to Impact Exchange.
It's a pleasure to be here, Richard.
It's great to have you here. I'd really like to start, if it's okay, with something of kind of a personal note, I suppose. I'm really interested to know what piqued your interest, what sparked your interest in issues around international business and cross-cultural issues in particular?
Actually, it was a pretty basic story. In 1987, I was studying abroad in Rome, and you had mentioned the changes in the late 80s around globalization. Well, for us, it was the Black Monday in October of 87. The money I had saved up to study abroad was gone.
Wow.
So instead of jetting off to Switzerland or Greece like all the other American kids were doing, I was spending time with Italian friends. I got a job in Rome. I was spending time with my relatives who were down in southern Italy. And as a result, I ended up getting a richer, deeper experience. When I went back to finish up my undergrad degree, my psychology professor said, Paula, if this had such a profound influence on your life, why don't you study it? So I always say my graduate school application said, I want to study what makes people effective living and working internationally, and I want to know how they change from deep developmental global experiences. And I joke that 32 years later, I'm still studying what makes people effective living and working internationally and how they change from deep developmental global experiences.
And what did it do to you that time in, was it southern Italy, I gather from what you're saying?
I was in Rome, yes.
What kind of effect did it have on you personally?
So I think what effect it had on me is what's bearing out now in the research and in practice, and that is that when you have an opportunity to interact with people from the culture and really get to know people one-on-one in a very personal way, to learn how you are seen through the eyes of those from that culture, you grow and develop. So had I had the experience I was having with other Americans, spending time with Americans, it wouldn't have been rich and developmental.
Right.
So I think even today, too many companies believe that you can put someone in another country and then all of a sudden, fairy dust drops over them and they become culturally agile.
That it happens automatically,
right.
but of course
it's not how it
doesn't. Yeah, absolutely. And I guess the danger that we've seen very often in that situation is you gravitate towards the expat community.
Of course.
And lead a somewhat culturally sheltered existence. So,
and that's so natural. That is the most natural thing that we as humans do. Whenever we're under stress, we cling to familiar. So, and what we've known from the research is that when you're living and working abroad, your body is naturally under stress. So it's one of the most natural things we do. And in doing so, though, we don't develop. So something needs to kind of actively pull us out of that.
Take us through, what do you think are some of the key things that make for a successful kind of cultural adjustment process?
Right. I think one of the most important things that we've learned in the research and I've learned in practice is that if companies can set up some type of a buddy program or an opportunity to have someone be an informal coach and allow the person who's going into that new culture to give him or her the license to be coached.
Yeah.
The willingness to say, I have the humility to say that I don't know how it happens here in this country. I could be great at chemistry, journalism, supply chain, whatever it might be, but I don't know how to do that here. And as soon as that changes, that frame of reference changes, people start to develop. It's just that sometimes we can't overcome that.
Are there personal traits that you think or your research has identified or associated with this capacity to be, well, you might call culturally agile, but are there any traits or qualities that you think corporations and people should look out for? Do I have that kind of in me to be able to be culturally adept?
Yeah, absolutely. I often get the question about, training versus selection.
Sure.
And about 80-90% of firms offer some form of training, but only about 20% or so are actually selecting people for international assignments. And I always joke, I say, look, if you're going to spend money in one place or the other, spend it on selection. Because if you take individuals who have a high tolerance of ambiguity, high resilience, high level of curiosity, humility, perspective taking, if you find those individuals, they'll be effective almost anywhere. And then when they learn in country, then great things will happen.
Right.
But just because someone knows how things could happen in another country doesn't mean they're going to be effective.
Okay. So that goes to the point, I think sometimes we might call it cosmopolitanism, like an interest or a predisposition to kind of be, I've always wanted to travel, or I've always, is that important, not so important? Certainly not enough on its own, if I understand you correctly. Where would you place that sort of cosmopolitan piece in all of this?
Yeah, so cosmopolitanism works really well with C-suite executives, senior executives who are traveling and working within their different regional subsidiaries,
right,
and in and out of headquarters. That works beautifully.
Right.
The second they start dropping into subsidiaries, into countries, having to do government relations, doing sales, marketing, anything where local knowledge is critical, then all of a sudden the cosmopolitanism starts to wear thin.
Now, one of the really big drivers, I guess, behind the popularity of this whole field of cross-cultural management, cross-cultural sensitivity, was the amazing impact that the controversial book 1980, Culture's Consequences, associated with Gert Hofstadter, had, where he controversially identified the existence of national cultural types. What do you make of this natural cultural type argument, that the Italians have predispositions, or, there's a natural cultural type that, Italians tend to be like, or the Australians, for heavens above, or anything? What do you make of that whole literature, I guess, in that tradition?
Certainly. And there's a place for it, right? To understand and raise an expectation of how a culture might differ. Certainly, the greatest ones we see, formality and informality, can really affect the way you establish credibility, how you collaborate. Things like egalitarianism, hierarchy, those two can really affect those. But once those are sort of understood that they could be present in another culture, we really do need to back off and say, people are people. We need to be better at understanding and reading the lens of the environment we're in.
Yeah, I think one of the issues about the national cultural types is it can pretty quickly descend into cultural stereotyping, that all Americans are like. But of course, as even I know, New York City is not America; it's New York City, and different parts of it, different parts of that corporate culture are very important. So let's talk a little bit more then about having that, what I think you would call cultural agility. So an awareness that there are cultural differences, and there can be national, what would we say, proclivities or ways of doing business, say, which we can talk about. But then what's it take to be culturally agile within that, to be aware of that, but not to be determined by it. So.
Right. It is exactly that. It's to be aware of it. And what we found with culturally agile professionals is they know how to respond to the cultural difference.
Got it.
And the reason we called it agility was because there's really kind of three different responses one can have. One is, we call it cultural minimization. It's the idea that, I know that this is going to be a cultural difference, but because of our safety, security, ethics, production schedule, we're going to have to do things a certain way that are counterculture. So that's one way.
Nice.
Another way is adaptation, and we always think about adaptation, that I'm going to comport myself in a way that you're expecting me to behave. We see that in sales, in marketing, we see that in government relations. That's full adaptation. But there's this third version. It's called integration. And what we're finding there is that business leaders are willing to say, look, it's not going to be my way. It's not going to be your way. We're going to create a different culture that's going to be different from the culture across the hall. We're going to work together to find cultural norms that will fit our group. And what we're finding is that the most culturally agile professionals, they can work across those three. They know when to minimize, when to adapt, and when to integrate.
Great.
And it's been fascinating, really watching that play out in organizations.
Yeah. No, I think that's a really great strength of your work. It's not kind of like one size fits all, or the generalizations aren't there. It accepts that importance of judgment
And strategy.
and strategizing.
Right.
Interesting. Tell me more about that.
Absolutely. We do that at the organizational level. So if I'm working with an organization and they want to start building out their global footprint, one of the first things we talk about from a human talent perspective is how is your organization creating wealth, and what do you need in the hearts and minds of the people who will be building and expanding. If you need everything to be the same everywhere in the world, then we need one strategy. If we want great adaptation around the world, we need a different strategy. If we're in kind of a innovation product team, sharing of knowledge, we need a third strategy. So it actually works at the organizational level as well as at the individual level.
I mean, one lesson of that is probably, even though we think we're in a culturally familiar environment, we should remain alert to the possibilities of cultural difference. Have you got any other thoughts about that?
We did a study once that looked at Anglos going to Anglo cultures,
Great,
Anglos
yeah,
going to
great,
non-Anglo
okay.
cultures. And it was actually the Anglos going to Anglo cultures that were having greater adjustment challenges. They weren't expecting there to be a difference. They were expecting it to be easy. And next thing you know, it was actually quite challenging. But the Anglos going to non-Anglo cultures, they knew it was going to be challenging. So they were more willing to ask questions. How should I do it here? What's the best way to be successful? How do I run this meeting? How should I lead? They were more humble about how to be in that culture.
But globalisation is changing, being influenced a bit recently by the work of Richard Baldwin, for example, who's written most recently about the globotics upheaval. This has the potential, I think, to again transform globalisation. What maybe are some of those or other trends that you think are on the horizon going to mean for this area, mean for organisations?
Right. So I always look at trends in terms of what organizations are calling me for.
Oh, yeah, great.
And lately I've been getting a lot of calls to assist with how do we get our virtual global teams, those global teams that know each other only through synchronous, asynchronous technology, telepresence, and the like.
Right.
How do we get them bonded, trusting each other, collaborating, really relying on each other as much as we would the people that we see every day. And that's been fascinating because the number of calls that we're getting for that type of work has gone up dramatically in the past few years. And what's interesting is it's not difficult to do, to be fully virtual and still build trust and credibility, but it has to be intentional. So for instance, we trust people who we know are competent. We trust people who we know we like. And so the competence can be a bit, we can get there if we know somebody's track record, if we know someone's background.
Right.
But liking people requires more one-on-one real time together. So what we're doing is with these organizations, we're actually including, say at the beginning of a telepresence meeting, we might have people share their weekends, just like you would normally do in a more casual environment. Most people don't want to do that. When technology is present, everyone thinks efficiency.
Right.
But we also need to really think in kind of social attachment.
Can I ask your thoughts again, looking forward as well as that other debate about as to whether we're going to find continuing globalisation or we're going to find more islandization or a re-parochialism. I'm struggling for the best terms here. You can probably help me out.
But nationalism, unfortunately.
Well, let's just use that term, right? Good old-fashioned nationalism, or even within ethnic groups within Any thoughts about that and the ways that those geopolitical forces might be interacting with the future of international and global business?
Yes.
Optimist or pessimist, Paula?
I'm an optimist. I am an optimist because even though there's this tug of nationalism in many countries around the world, including my own, we're still seeing that organizations, large multinational organizations, for the reasons you started the show with, we're still seeing those organizations expanding out their global footprint. They might be getting smarter about artificial intelligence. They're getting smarter about supply chain and sourcing in terms of how they leverage their footprint around the world. But in terms of actually growing their organizations, I'm not seeing that contract.
No.
So we're still going to have global presence. How we do that might change over time.
Yes.
But we're still going to have global presence for as long as organizations want to grow.
And for as long as those organisations are growing, I hope that they continue to be informed by your research, your evidence, your common sense, and the great work that you're doing in the area. Paula, it's been an absolute delight to have you on Impact Exchange.
That was my pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.